Hello, welcome to Kimberley Neve. You're a nutritionist, aren't you, Kimberley?
Yes.
Yes, I'm delighted to speak to you. So, what's your business name?
The business name is Neve Nutrition and Wellbeing.
Excellent. So I'm really, as I mentioned, I'm really excited to talk to you because this is a subject I'm really passionate about, and I believe that we all have to take responsibility for our health and how we live our everyday life. And that's just by eating well every day rather than fatty diets, which presumably is something like you're passionate about as well.
Yes, very much so. Yep.
You weren't always a nutritionist, is that right?
It's true. I used to be a secondary school teacher of languages. So I was a language teacher in England, but also abroad. And my languages were German and Italian at university. And then I learned French, so I could teach that because in England you have to teach German and French. And from there, picked up some Spanish, and then was able to do that around the world a little bit. So Switzerland and South Korea, where I was head of department. And to be honest, that job was so stressful and so many hours and such a bad work-life balance. It was definitely a tipping point, I think. But it was before that I'd already decided, okay, I might want to change careers at some point. And then I think South Korea was really great for career, a great career change. But at the same time, it was the point where you just think, okay, I need to change, and let's do it soon.
So why nutrition? Like it's like from languages to food is quite a big shift.
There's not much you can kind of pull apart from culture and food being exciting in any, you learn a language, you tend to learn about the food first, or I do. And when I travel, to be honest, what I do when I travel is like go from place to place. I think I'll go there for lunch and I'll walk somewhere and then I'll go there for dinner. But really it's because I've always had an interest in food, which I think most people say. Everyone's a bit of a foodie, I think, deep down a little bit. There's only a very few people I've met that just don't really care and kind of use it for fuel. But then, to be honest, in my 20s, I had an eating disorder and it took over everything. And it was a really awful period of time where it's just it consumes you, and it really has an effect because eating disorders are mental health problems, and they're not very easily talked about. And I didn't really think I had one. I just thought I just wasn't very disciplined because I had binge eating disorder and would hide it, and I exercised a lot, so I managed to hide it my weight because people assume that with an eating disorder you either go up in weight or down in weight quite dramatically, and that's just not the case all the time. So I was kind of feeling alone with it, and didn't realize I had it. And then I had an ankle injury, which meant I couldn't do the exercise, and it kind of all exploded a little, imploded, I think is a term. And I wouldn't go out with friends because I was worried about eating too much, or I was worried about looking greedy if I ordered something. Maybe I eat beforehand. And it was just awful. It just took over everything. Like I was thought about it all the time. And when you get like meetings at work, you get the cookies or the biscuits. We used to have this fabulous Friday breakfast in our campus, and it was awful. Like it was the best breakfast, the best kind of foods. Everyone was really generous, and it was a really nice time. But all I could think about was how much I was going to eat, and then should I make up for that later on in the day? And I was obsessing about numbers. I was on my Fitbit all the time, and then just felt awful all the time and guilty and consumed with food, thinking about it, planning about what to eat, when to eat, what not to eat, trying not to eat. It was just ridiculous. And at some point I had help because I got very, very sad and depressed with it. And I think it was around then I thought, this isn't okay. And why aren't more people talking about this? Because you start reading up on your own, you start looking at sugar, and you start looking at the food industry and how clever they are and how powerful. And basically my interest started with, okay, very personal. And actually it's very much not recommended to have personal issues and then become a nutritionist trying to deal with those issues. You've got to deal with it first and really kind of come out on the other side before you change. And that's something that some people do. And then of course their clinical practice isn't particularly helpful for some people because they're basing it on their own experiences, or they still have their own food rules that aren't very healthy. So it started with that personal, and then got into the anger of the food industry, and I kind of went through a phase of I hate Kellogg's and Nestle and MacDonald's, and I still kind of do, but there's a bigger picture. And so I looked at ways, because changing is hard. And as a teacher, I loved my job, so I was okay. But I think the issue there was that I knew I didn't want to do it forever. And like I said, I was head of department in Korea, and that's as high as I wanted to go, because after that, you don't really have as much time with the kids, and that's the fun part of the job. It's the stressful part, but it's the reason you're a teacher is because of that interaction, and the kids are just great day to day. And so I thought, well, I don't want to be head of department for the next 30, 40 years. What am I going to do? And then I was in South Korea trying to speak German all the time, and you start losing languages after a while. So I thought, in 30 years, I'm going to be a really rubbish teacher because I won't remember the languages. And so I was, the kind of thinking, I need to change. I'm going to change. Might as well do it now, because I'm in a position where I'm single. I had capital. I had potentially time at weekends. So I basically I'd started a master's in education and spent most of the time researching jobs or food. So I thought, all right, maybe I should change. And in that time, I realized how hard it is to change career, because you need qualifications, and I didn't have the time and money to stop working to do that. But what I did, I finally found the perfect course. It was a master's, and to get onto it, I needed to do some bio and chemistry and nutrition studying and knowledge and tests beforehand. And I was very lucky that I was able to do that remotely and online. So I did that while I was in Korea, and basically just didn't have weekends for a while, which is kind of what happens when you are starting something new. You have to invest some time. I loved it. I just love that biology element. It's so clever. It's so interesting. Our bodies are ridiculously cool. And it really kind of got me into okay, what kind of little changes can you make? What is the actual evidence? Because I've been brought up reading the same magazines as you guys, I think, and luckily not brought up with social media, which is just this whole other kettle of fish. But, just with magazines, friends at school, and all the advice coming in, you should be doing this, no carbs this week, no wine that week, no chocolate ever. And it was really nice to get to the science behind the facts and actually just clear up all the questions, is this better than that? And sometimes I still find myself, I have rice instead of, I think I caught myself the other day thinking I'll have pasta instead of rice because it's healthy, or rice instead of pasta because it's healthier. And I just thought, that doesn't work. What am I talking about? And it just reminded me, I read that in a magazine years ago. I mean, what am I saying? And so I love the science behind it, and built that up, and then was able to start the master's a couple of years ago in London. And it had a public health focus too. So that brought in my anger at the food industry, and it's the kind of link between policy is really boring to most people, and definitely to me. It was my least favorite module. Now I've ended up working in food policy, because as it happens, that's how you get the changes through. That's how you make changes. It's through the government. It's through the fact that our food industry is so powerful in our country, unfortunately. And if you want policies that make healthy eating easier for people, then you've got to go that route, and the government route is actually really interesting. So that was a very long version to say that I managed to get onto the course, and I loved it, and I landed it. That made me happy. But last year I started the business, because it's that personal aspect that's so much more interesting. That's so much, it just really lights a fire. It's something I've always wanted to do, is kind of help people that have had similar issues to me. But I think so many people just have questions about food, and questions about, is it real? Should I do this instead of that? My partner asked me the other day, is pink Himalayan salt actually healthier? It's not. And so it's, and sometimes, someone will ask me something, and I think I need to research that myself, because I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure it's the right answer. Go on, sorry.
So you still work for the government, don't you? So you've got your private practice, but you work for the Department of Health, is that correct?
Kind of. I actually work for the Centre for Food Policy, and we're based at City University in London. But I'm in the Obesity Policy Research Unit, and all of our research is for the Department of Health and Social Care. So they say, we're interested in this area. We develop research questions, research projects. They say yes or no, we'll tweak it, and we carry on with that research. And then our research turns into policy implications and recommendations, and then it goes back to them, and then it's a huge long process I'm not involved in, where they either put it into place or not, but at least, you know, it's based on research with real people, which is nice.
Okay, so going back to the Himalayan salt, what are some of the myths, common myths that just aren't true, that might surprise people?
I have a whole series actually, Myth Busting Mondays, because there's a lot of them, and I think the ones that most people find interesting, the one that's done the most, has done quite well, is with about, you know, eggs and cholesterol, because eggs contain cholesterol. The assumption or the belief a few years ago, and it kind of stays in people's mind, is that it raises your cholesterol when you eat eggs, but that's not true. So actually what happens is you eat eggs, but eating food that are high in cholesterol, like eggs and liver, doesn't increase your own cholesterol. Eating foods high in saturated fats, so like butter, some, you know, meat with the fat on, they do increase your cholesterol levels. And then there are foods that can reduce your cholesterol levels. Things like fat burning foods, that's a myth that doesn't exist. There are a couple of foods like caffeine and green tea that can very, like, research shows it very slightly increases your metabolism. So then what you get as a headline on social media or in a magazine is increases your metabolism, means you burn fat more easily, you're burning through calories without even trying, and that's just not true. It has such a minimal effect that it doesn't help with weight loss. So the crux of it is they're not going to help you lose weight, but they very slightly increase your metabolism, but you wouldn't notice that.
So all those kind of fat burning products that people buy don't help.
Huge one is detox as well. There's detox teas, they're just laxatives and they're very dangerous actually. And detox cleanses, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but they're a load of BS, because basically there's organs in your body that detox for you, and it doesn't matter what you eat, they're going to do it. So your liver is the huge one, and your kidney, skin's even a detox in your body, and there's no food that can cleanse your body. It just doesn't work like that. So your food doesn't cleanse.
My sister spends 6 weeks every January and February torturing herself with a cleanse, and it's all pointless.
I'm afraid so. I mean, some people tend to feel better because they feel like they are getting rid of things, but your body does that itself. And with juice cleanses, you've got to be careful there, because although you're getting some vitamins and minerals, you're not getting any fiber, you're not getting protein, you're not getting some really key, like, you know, vitamin B12 is only available in meat. So you might lose weight because you're just consuming less in general, but it's very short term, like every diet. And then what you're not considering is the vitamin, mineral, protein deficiencies that you're getting. And fiber is huge. So if you're juicing something, you're not getting the fiber from the fruit or veg. So that's half the reason they're so healthy. It's not just their vitamin and mineral content, it's how great the fiber is and for your gut microbiome health. And juice cleanses are just a very short-term way of people consuming fewer calories and feeling good about it, but it's going to lead to headaches and nausea, sometimes some gastro problems. Not worth it. Certainly not worth spending money on.
And what about, so the opposite to that then? What's a good diet? What should people be looking at for? And I know you wrote an article for us about the link between food and mental health as well, which we often don't consider. It's not just about how fat or thin we are, or healthy or unhealthy, but actually how we physically feel emotionally, isn't it, as well?
I think that's near enough everything, actually. I mean, there's a lot to say that it's not just about what you look like and your weight as to how healthy you are. And health isn't about weight. It's not even just about nutrition. And that's why it's Neve Nutrition and Wellbeing, because if you're unhappy, then that's not, an unhappy person isn't going to be a healthy person, regardless of what they eat. Sleep is such a huge thing, physical activity. So the diet to be on is the one that you can follow for the rest of your life, which means it's not going to be some fad diet. That's the whole point. That they are short term, so they don't work. I mean, if they worked, you'd only ever have done one diet in your life, and the diet industry wouldn't be so rich. So I'm afraid it's a really unsexy answer, which is a balance between what you want to eat and nutritious foods. So never restrict any food group that you want to eat. The only foods that should be off the table are ones you're allergic to, cause some kind of reaction, or maybe you don't want to eat for different reasons. Let's say if you're a vegan and you don't want to eat certain foods. But as far as health and nutrition go, you want about 80% of just really nutritious fruits, your veg, your grains. And here we're talking any pasta, any rice, any bread you like, because all in moderation, everything is fine. And you can have a chocolate bar a day if you balance it out. Sorry.
So I was going to say, just that eat any pasta and any rice. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but so should people be avoiding white goods and go for the whole wheat version? Or actually, it is the ideal, but it's balanced. It's actually not that bad to eat white stuff.
This will depend on where the person is. My thing is always whole grain because it's got more fiber, and I'm all about the fiber because the gut microbiome is such a huge factor of health, nutritional health. The more fiber, the better. But if you increase it too quickly, then that can cause you some GI problems. So you need to do it slowly. So I would say whole grain instead of white because it's just more nutritious and therefore more filling. You'd feel full up for longer. But if you're talking to someone, it depends who you're talking to. So if they're talking to someone who's scared of carbs and loves, white bread and wants to introduce it back into their diet, but is a bit scared about it, I'd say, well, yeah, absolutely. It can be part of a healthy diet. Everything can. And it's just, and then when someone's, if someone's trying to be a little bit healthier, but without feeling like they're on a diet, then it might be where you make some very small changes over a period of time. So it's like marginal gains. I don't know if you remember the British cycling team. A few years ago, 2003, they had a new coach and he did all these tiny changes to make every tiny thing, like the brakes, the clothes they wore, 1% better. And then within 5 years, they were winning gold medals left, right, center at the Olympics. And it's a very similar approach that I take. If you've got to meet someone where they're at, there's no point putting someone on eggs and avocado and quinoa when they like it. So it's a case of, if you're scared of carbs, well, actually you should be eating carbs because they're fiber and they are part of a balanced diet and they're good for you. But if you already have quite a lot of white bread, white pasta, maybe I would consider looking at whole grains because it's more fiber and it's slightly healthier and it's normally going to keep you fuller for longer. So it depends on what someone's goals are.
So 80% then, if your diet is good 80% of the time, that 20%, it's okay to have like chocolate and wine and chips.
Well, the thing with diets, not only are they boring, but they kind of make you feel like you're a boring person because you don't go. The whole thing about food is that it's social. You want to go out. And if you don't like chocolate or wine, then fair enough. Don't be eating it because you think it's full of antioxidants. You need to eat and drink things that you enjoy. Food is about enjoyment. And if you're on any kind of plan, you need to make it sustainable. That means you need to enjoy your food. So with the 80-20, I'm careful with that because I was talking to a client about this and then they found a book about the 90 and 10% or the 80 and 20. And of course, they went back to numbers and tracking and calorie counting again, which I think we'll talk about. But that's not what I meant. What I meant was if you actually let yourself have things that you're craving that you want every day, every other day, rather than good Monday to Friday, binging, but overeating at the weekends or having all the foods that you want on one day because you just want it and you've been restricting it. That's actually really quite unhealthy. But if you just let yourself have what you want, listening to your body, like really trying to cue in those, listening to the cues of when you're hungry, after a while, it takes time, but it really does balance out. And essentially that's the approach that I'm trying to take with people, where you eat the foods you enjoy, you learn the balance, you learn to listen to hunger, and when you actually do want the food, and really coming away from that, I'm going to restrict myself from good, that the language you use around food is very important. As soon as you say a food is good or clean, then you are telling yourself that you shouldn't have the other foods. But what that does is make you want them more. And I'm sure you've been there, right? You say, well, I shouldn't have this and I shouldn't have that. And by the weekend, that's all you've been thinking about. It's all you want. And then you overeat on them. And after you feel a bit rubbish. Often you feel a bit rubbish because you kind of like, oh.
You have a treat. Instead of going, oh, this is a really lovely dessert or a really lovely glass or bottle of wine, you're drinking it and hating yourself while you're drinking it. So it's a weird thing. Like you're consuming something that maybe is less good for you, but you're not even getting the emotional enjoyment from it.
Exactly. And if you're able to get that balance by having a little bit here and there every day, every other day, something that, when you really fancy it, then it can really help just overall well-being. You feel in control, and it kind of flips it over. Instead of you thinking about food and obsessing about it all the time, you can just have it as a an enjoyable part of your life. And that is so far away for a lot of people. I mean, not to talk about eating disorders, because that's actually a very complex issues. But I think a lot of people have disordered eating, which is where it's not quite an eating disorder, but it's those food wars all the time. It's those magazines, the social media posts where you're like, oh, I shouldn't have this, or that's more healthy than that, I'll be good for this, and I want to go on that diet tomorrow. And there's so much of that I want to kind of cut through. And we need more people. There's actually a lot of registered nutritionists and dietitians that have the knowledge and are evidence-based, but what they're selling isn't quite as sexy. Or you also have people who can call themselves nutritionists, but they're therapists, and they're not evidence-based, not based on science, and they can recommend all these things that I just think I would never recommend. So it's a minefield about what you can trust.
And can I ask you how you feel about sort of ready meals or pre-prepared food? And obviously there's the clearly bad end of the market, where it's cheap, mass-produced food with loads of sugar put into it, or the sort of the low fat or zero fat stuff has actually got other things instead in as well. But what about the sort of the healthier end of what people might think of, that is healthier pre-prepared food? What do you think about that?
So it depends on the food. There is definitely a space for ready meals, right? We're busy, especially when we start going back into offices and things. There is a space for food that is fast, and all food that's fast is junk food. It's just most of it is. I think of places like Lyon, they have some options that are really, that I would call nutritious and would go for myself. And it's like having a treat every now and then. Sure, that's fine. But if you're having a ready meal all the time, what you tend to be having is, they tend to have a higher amount of salt than you'd ever put in your own cooking, smaller portions or a smaller amount of veg. And if you're having ready meals, what I normally recommend is adding your own vegetables, because they're normally quick to prepare, especially in the microwave. That keeps all the nutrients in nicely. But yeah, I mean, if you're having them all the time, what you're going to find is you're hungry quite quickly. You've got a high salt and probably sugar intake, and you're not feeling full or satisfied. But I appreciate not everyone has the time to cook all the time. People are busy with kids, and there are meals you can batch cook. There's meals that are quick and easy. There's a lot of them. But sometimes you just don't want, or you want a backup option. So it's not that they're bad. I've never put them off limits, but it's being aware that a lot of trying to cut through the packaging and learning how to read the nutrient and the ingredients is actually really important. So looking at those salt levels, how much protein's in something, how much fiber. But then who's got the time for that? I mean, the whole point of my job day to day is where we do the research. It's looking at what do people do on a day-to-day basis? How can you make that easier for them? Because people know what a healthy diet is. They know that it's all about balance and moderation and fruit and veg. But the reason people aren't doing it on the whole is because it's harder and more expensive. And like those healthy ready meals, the ones that I would consider healthy, the ones I've seen are just crazy expensive. The reason I buy them, I just think, Christ, I can cook that at home. I'm going to have to just find the time. So it does depend where you're at, how much money you've got, unfortunately, and your priorities, because everyone's priorities are different, and health isn't always everyone's top priority when there's other stuff going on.
And you mentioned calorie counting earlier, so I can guess what you think about that. Not really a fan?
Mostly no. I think, again, so the thing with, if you find a registered nutritionist or dietitian, what you'll find is most of their sentences start with "it depends." And if someone giving you a very definite answer, then they're probably spouting a little bit of rubbish. The reason it depends, normally I'm against it because it often leads to obsession with numbers, and actually calorie counting is quite tricky because your body uses calories differently to somebody else. And so unfortunately they found that people in bigger bodies use more of the nutrients from the food than people in lean bodies. So they're getting more calories from the same amount of food as someone in a lean body. That's linked to gut microbiome, according to recent research, all very new. But with calories, you tend to be obsessing about numbers, and that means you could be eating lots of not very nutritious or filling foods, but it's under the calorie count. And what that's not giving you is a way to live your life normally, because weighing everything and counting everything just isn't sustainable. The only time I'd ever consider it really, and that's why it's not completely off the table, is where you're having someone who's really healthy but just isn't losing weight or is even putting it on, and they say to you, but I'm healthy and I eat this and this, and you think, well, that does sound healthy, often then it's about portion size. So tracking portion sizes and how many calories that is over like a week max can help people think, oh, okay, that's a lot more than I realized, or that sauce, that oil, all those extras. That's where people can start to see, okay, now I understand where these extra calories are coming from. Because very simply, you know, if you are using more calories in eating, yes, you should be losing weight. But it is tricky because actually how calories are calculated isn't particularly trustworthy, and it can vary by quite a large percentage between MyFitnessPal and some other app. How many calories they say are in a food as to what you're actually consuming, even if it says on the packet, sometimes it's just not quite right. So it's just a way to give yourself a headache and give yourself extra work. And I think for a short time to know what you're doing, fine. Otherwise, you need to find a way that you can be looking at hunger levels and just what you want to eat rather than how many calories it has. It just, a lot of very unhealthy foods could have few calories, you know. So health is about nutrition, and nutrition is not about just calories. It's about a lot more.
And what about the gut? You mentioned that. I mean, that's obviously in the last few years, it has made a lot of headlines, and a lot of products, such as probiotic products, have come out. So how important is our gut health, and what can we do to improve it? And what myths do you want to bust around that as well?
Myths. It's tricky because research is quite new with the gut microbiome and how it links to mental health, how it links to overall health. I mean, it's linked to potentially to so many things. What I can confidently say though is that diets higher in fruits, vegetables, grains, and by grains I'm talking about like your wholemeal bread and pasta, legumes, so like lentils, chickpeas, beans of any sort, nuts and seeds. If you've got as much of that in your diet as possible, your gut will be happy. And what those foods do, they have extra fiber, and the fiber is what passes through your small intestine into your large intestine. And that's where most of the microbes are, and they feed on fiber because it's not digested properly all the way through. And that's food for them. And when they eat it, they release gases, which is why if you eat more fiber, you tend to be a bit more gassy. And people know that about beans, for instance. So that's why I said, if you're trying to increase fiber, it's excellent, but don't do it all in one go because you'll balloon and feel quite uncomfortable. But everybody farts, so that's a very normal process throughout the day, and doesn't mean you have an intolerance. Myth busting with the thing with probiotics, prebiotics, again, it needs a bit more research. They have been shown to help. So things like Activia yogurts, they can help in that they're supposed to be giving those microbes food and helping them to eat. But there's a problem with knowing how much of them the probiotics or prebiotics get through to the large intestine, and really that's something you can experiment with, but it's not something you'll see like a huge effect of normally. People don't tend to see like, oh, I've just introduced this one food and now I'm suddenly cured of whatever problem I had. The biggest myth, I think, is that IBS is just for women who are, it's just women who are stressed. That's really not it. There's a lot going on, and there's a real connection, like in the article I think that there's a connection between the gut and the brain, and a genuine one. It's called the vagus nerve. So when you feel butterflies in your stomach, or when you kind of, when you need to pee, nervous, that's a genuine thing, where I won't go into the science, but essentially there's a connection and they're communicating with each other. And what that means is you're stressed about your symptoms and not, either being constipated or needing to go to the toilet a lot, and you think, oh, I'm worried about that, it does make it worse. And it's kind of a cyclical problem, but it's not just stress that's causing IBS. There's a lot of other factors. So other things that can affect gut health that people don't realize: smoking, for instance, pollution in the air, which isn't great when you live in London, much worse when I lived in South Korea. So there's a lot to talk about with gut health, and a lot of gut health problems really require a doctor and a dietitian, and someone with IBS really needs to seek some help because it's such a widespread problem. It's not just with women, and it's so misunderstood. And I think a lot of people kind of just poo-poo it. Oh, it's okay, it's normal, and it's really not normal to be uncomfortable all the time or not wanting to go out because of bowel problems.
Excellent. So I got another question I was thinking about. You said at the beginning about Himalayan salt. Why is that not good for you? Or why is it no better for you than normal salt?
it's just salt, it's just pink.
Oh, that's literally
It has
salt.
it has a slightly different mineral content, but it doesn't come out healthier in any way, shape, or form. It is just a form of salt that looks pretty, and costs you a lot of money.
Okay, excellent. I'll buying that then. And so how do you help people with, obviously you've got your government work, which is helping us all. How do you help people as a nutritionist?
Well, it's similar to what we've been talking about, my aim really is to help people feel free around food. And I offer nutrition check-ins. So that tends to be for people who have questions like yourself, or, I've got this issue or that issue. I had a client, for instance, who said, my periods have stopped and I know it's linked to nutrition because I've just stopped eating certain foods. Can you help? And all it took was one session to say, okay, listen to what they're doing, what they're eating, and then think about, okay, what's that linked to? What could be a good solution, and implement like a bit of a mini plan. But really, I come up with recommendations for people that's very much tailored to them, because it's about what they're eating, what they like to eat, what their problems, what their goals are. And then more of a long-term thing is the weight management. And I say management and not loss, because some people are trying to put on weight, is, a different thing. Most people are trying to lose weight. And with that comes probably a history of dieting. So my main clients tend to have a history of dieting, falling off the diet, because diets are meant to fail. That is the whole point of them. And then when you fail something and you feel it because you weren't disciplined enough, because you couldn't stick to it, you feel really rubbish, you feel guilty, you feel shameful. And what that leads to normally is overeating, which then leads to, okay, I need to start another diet. So you have this thing called the diet cycle. And it's so unhealthy and so unhelpful. And actually what happens is people put on weight long term. And I don't know if you've experienced this. I certainly did. I tried all the bloody diets and all I did was put on more weight in the end. And you have that short-term success that makes you think, oh, I can do this. I can be like those really skinny people I've seen that have been touting this method. And then of course you come off it and it just makes you feel a lot worse. So really might start with trying to look at people's relationship with food, taking a step back, looking at, okay, what do you want from life in general? What's your health in general? How are you feeling in your, in yourself? Like, what kind of things do you do for your own well-being? It's very much linked to how you eat and what you eat. I mean, we can all relate to emotional eating. I'm sometimes when I'm cold or when I'm bored, and and it's so linked that you've got to really look at someone's life in its context and what people are doing, and then look at, okay, what rules do you have about food that might not actually be based on science, might not actually be good for you? And then looking at, maybe as a way of improving your meals, is there a way of improving portion size? Often it's about increasing protein. It might be about bringing in more fiber, different cooking styles, or ways to introduce people to foods that they think they don't like, but actually might like, making those small changes. So it's a longer process of all small changes you can make, but really looking at the psychology behind it. And okay, what are you thinking about food? And food goes way back, right? So how you were brought up on food, whether you were made to finish your peas before you had dessert, whether you had to, how many of and people still do, right? You use sweets as a treat or as a reward. It's what we have at birthdays. What's a birthday without cake? This is not me saying that birthday, no cake for birthdays at all. But what I'm saying is like how you're brought up and how your family were around food, and it really has an impact. And finally, like if your mum was ever on diet or had restricted her eating around you as a kid, I think, please don't quote the number, but it's about 80% more likely for you to have some kind of disordered eating yourself. Yeah, that's how huge it is.
Yeah, there was a documentary with Professor Robert Winston, I think that's his name, and he was looking at, I think when he followed those children who were born in the year 2000 and followed them every 4 years, and he did one about that, and he was saying about how your mother talks about food really affects how you see it. So I'm really lucky, my mum has never ever been on a diet, never talks about food. You know, she just eats healthy food, and you know, my siblings and I have all grown up slim and with a good relationship with food. But I have seen that in friends whose mums were yo-yo dieting, and they were much more likely to go down that route. Definitely. And I think as a parent yourself, because I'm a mother of 2 children, and I do hope that I've instilled my children with a healthy relationship with food, and I'm very conscious of that as well.
And it's a really fine line as well, to be health conscious and want your kids to be, and then at the same time not making it such a thing. And what I'd recommend there is really looking at the language you use around food, apart from just what you're doing. Eating the same food as them is helpful, because if they see that mum eats something different, they're asking questions even if they don't say them out loud. And not calling a good food or a bad food, certainly not rewarding with treats. And what that does, if you say, if you do this or if you eat this, then you can have this, all that does is reinforce the idea that that's the food they want. And that's obviously the chocolates, the sweets that you want them to have a little bit less of. It's not great for them. You know, it's full of sugar. It's, you know, really quite bad for their teeth as well. And I think I had something else to say and I'd forgotten what it was. Yeah, but and not hiding vegetables actually is a bit of some people think, you know, putting courgette into a muffin, like, yes, I've got my son to eat courgette. What you've actually said to your son is, muffins are great, you like muffins. So being, you know, there's a few things that we think we're doing well with kids, but actually reinforce the exact opposite of what we're trying to say. It's hard though, especially when your kids are that fussy age between 2 and 5. I mean, especially like 2 to 3 years old, it's very hard you just want to feed them and make sure they have something. But language around food, I think, is the main thing as a parent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, how you know, and talking about, yeah, like saying, making like food's heroes almost, kind of, you know, the cakes and the crisps, but also making it something that you feel bad about as well, by putting a guilt attached to it as well. So where should people go if they want to learn about from good sources about, you know, non-faddy and simple ways? Because I liked what you said in the beginning, your philosophy about, and that 80-20, it's about actually having a diet, in the true sense of the word, that you can live with, you know, how you consume food. So where should people go for good advice that you recommend?
So trusted sources, if you've got like a question about certain foods or diet styles, are the British Dietetic Association. They have a website and they have lots on there about certain diet types and food types. NHS are also a really good go-to source, and in that they're trusted. They don't sometimes have the detail you want, but they're a good place to start. And then if you're looking for other advice, or if you're on social media, look for registered nutritionists. So for instance, I'm a registered associate nutritionist, the Association for Nutrition, like I'm accredited by a real body. And it bugs me that there's so many, so a nutritional therapist hasn't had the same scientific training. They are often looking at like holistic ways, or I don't know, like herbs and therapies that aren't based on evidence. So look for registered dietitians or nutritionists that are accredited and affiliated with either the British Dietetic Association or the Association for Nutrition. There's lots of them on Instagram, and unfollow anyone who is talking about detoxing or diets. And it's really quite hard because it looks appealing and you see the results, and everybody wants to lose weight quicker than it ever actually takes. But what I recommend if you're going to detox anything is your social media, and just go through and just think, okay, they're talking about detox diets, unfollow. They're talking about weight loss in 2 weeks, unfollow. If it's quick, it's just not going to work. It's not real. So I think that's the main thing I would advise.
Okay, and what's your top diet? And I said diet, I don't mean in terms of losing weight, I mean eating healthily. What's your absolute top tip?
I think being kinder to yourself. I'm hoping this is one tip in, there's a few sentences, but in theory it's one tip, this sense of allowing yourself to have what you want in balance and moderation is key. Enjoying your food. So that could be enjoying nutritious food, enjoying treats, but overall listening to hunger and enjoyment, really kind of tune in with how you're feeling. And if you want chocolate, having it, like that sense of being kinder to yourself, not beating yourself up about eating foods that you don't think are very nutritious. And overall, hopefully that leads, I mean, it takes some time, but it can lead to a healthier relationship in general. And related to that, if you're constantly stressed about food, I just released something on Instagram about chronic stress. And essentially, if you have a low level of stress all the time, let's just face it, mums do. But if you're even, like, the irony is, if you're stressed about food a little bit all the time, that is what we call chronic stress. And that actually tends to elevate levels of cortisol in the body. And what that can lead to is water retention. So annoyingly, being stressed about your weight over a period of time can make you put on weight, which isn't very helpful. So stressing less and having that time for yourself to just get a good perspective of things, what you really want in life, what's actually, health, not just what you look like.
Brilliant. Really good advice. Thank you so much. It's really interesting. I could talk to you all day about and pick your brains about food.
Well, you could probably tell I can talk there, but thank you for interrupting with some good questions.
No, thank you so much. And where can people find you? What's your website? I will put it as a link, but what is your website?
So it's nevenutrition.co.uk, or on Instagram at Neve Nutrition, and that's Neve.
And Neve is, yes, Neve, I was going to say Neve. So Neve Nutrition, Neve. Thank you so much, Neve.
Thank you.
It's really been fascinating. And I will put links in this for everything that you've mentioned, and the websites as well, so people can find them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.